That morning in Providence felt different. The air was cold, crisp, and unusually still outside the courthouse. The city was waking up slowly, cars rolling past the quiet streets, people clutching their coffee cups as the winter sun tried to break through the clouds. Inside the courtroom, however, there was warmth, the kind of warmth that always followed Judge Frank Caprio wherever he went. For years, people had walked into his courtroom filled with fear, uncertainty, or shame. And yet, somehow, they always left feeling a little lighter. Because Frank Caprio didn't just see people for their mistakes, he saw their hearts. That day, though, when he entered and took his seat, his kind eyes caught sight of something that made him pause. There, standing quietly in front of the bench, was a young black girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, and she was holding a wrinkled piece of paper in her trembling hands. Her name was Aaliyah Thompson. She was nervous, though she tried not to show it. The fluorescent lights above seemed too bright, the courtroom too big. It was her first time standing in a place like this, where every sound echoed, where every whisper felt like a judgment. The court clerk read her charge. Disturbing the peace in a classroom and showing disrespect toward a teacher. To most people, it sounded small, almost trivial. But for Aaliyah, it was everything. It was the first mark against her name, the first official stain on a record she had fought to keep clean. Judge Caprio looked at her over his glasses, his tone calm but firm. "Good morning, young lady. What's your name?" She swallowed hard. "Aaliyah Thompson, sir." "All right, Aaliyah," the judge said gently. "Tell me, what happened?" Aaliyah hesitated. Her eyes darted to the audience, strangers watching, some curious, others sympathetic. Then she looked down again, her voice quiet. "My teacher, she told me to sit in the back," she said slowly, her words trembling. "Because my hair was too distracting." The judge frowned slightly. She said, "Girls like you should know better." The courtroom fell silent. For a long moment, even the sound of the pen scratching on paper stopped. Caprio leaned back, studying her face. He had seen hundreds of cases, people angry, defensive, scared, but Aaliyah looked different. She looked wounded, she continued, her voice breaking just slightly. "I told her it wasn't fair. I wasn't yelling or being rude, I just said, 'That's not fair.' Then she yelled at me, said I was talking back, and sent me to the principal. Next thing I knew, they called the police." The words hung in the air like smoke. A 16-year-old girl brought into a courtroom for saying, "That's not fair." Judge Caprio sat in silence for several seconds. He looked down at the report, then back at Aaliyah. His eyes softened. "What grade are you in, Aaliyah?" he asked. "10th grade," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "What do you want to do when you finish school?" Her answer came so quietly, it almost disappeared in the stillness. "I want to be a lawyer one day. Maybe someone like you." And at that moment, the old judge took off his glasses and looked away, because sometimes even judges need a second to steady their hearts. The courtroom felt smaller now, more intimate, like it was no longer about laws or rules, but something deeper. Finally, Caprio spoke. "You know, Aaliyah," he said softly, "when I was young, my father taught me something I never forgot. He said, 'Son, remember this, no one is better than anyone else. Not because of how they look, not because of where they come from, not because of the color of their skin.'" He paused, his voice heavy with sincerity. "What you went through should never happen to anyone." A few people in the courtroom nodded quietly. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Judge Caprio asked the court officer, "Is there any record of previous incidents involving this young lady?" The officer shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "First time." Caprio nodded slowly. "I thought so," he said. "She's not a troublemaker. She's a young woman who stood up for herself, and that takes courage." Aaliyah blinked hard, trying not to cry. He looked at her again, his tone warm but instructive. "Aaliyah, listen to me. You did nothing wrong by defending your dignity. But you must learn something important: when you stand up for yourself, do it calmly, with strength, not anger. That's how you win. Not just today, but for the rest of your life. Her tears finally spilled over. They weren't tears of shame, they were the release of everything she had been holding in for weeks. For the first time, someone believed her. Someone had seen the truth. And that truth mattered. Judge Caprio closed the file in front of him and looked directly into her eyes. "I'm dismissing this case," he said firmly. "You don't belong in a courtroom, Aaliyah. You belong in a classroom learning, dreaming, and becoming everything you're meant to be." The room stayed silent for a few seconds, that kind of silence that's louder than applause. Then Aaliyah whispered, barely audibly, "Thank you, sir." Caprio smiled. "No need to thank me," he said. "Just promise me one thing." She looked up, wiping her cheeks. "Promise me," he continued, "that you'll never let anyone make you feel small because of who you are. Ever. Hold your head high, Aaliyah. And when you become that lawyer one day, come back here and remind me that I made the right choice." The courtroom erupted in quiet applause. Even the officers, usually expressionless, clapped softly. The audience members smiled through tears. As Aaliyah turned to leave, her steps were slow, steady, not the nervous shuffle of the girl who had walked in, but the confident stride of someone who had found her worth again. Outside, the cold air met her face, but she didn't feel it. She felt lighter. As if the weight she'd been carrying, of doubt, of pain, of injustice, had finally been lifted. The narrator's voice grows softer here, reflective. Aaliyah Thompson was 16, just 16, yet she had already learned what many adults never do. That sometimes, standing up for yourself means standing alone. And that sometimes, justice doesn't come from the law, but from compassion. That day in Providence wasn't just another case for Judge Caprio. It was a reminder of why he had chosen this path decades ago. He had seen enough of life to know that rules alone don't heal hearts. Only understanding does. Only empathy can. Long after the case ended, long after the courtroom had emptied, Judge Caprio sat at his bench, deep in thought. He looked at the chair where Aaliyah had stood and sighed softly. He thought of his own childhood, his father, an immigrant barber who taught him about kindness, fairness, and humility. He remembered those early lessons. That a person's worth isn't measured by their clothes, their accent, or their color, it's measured by their heart. And he knew, if his father were alive today, he'd be proud. Meanwhile, across the city, Aaliyah walked home. Each step echoing on the wet pavement, each breath visible in the winter air. Her thoughts were still tangled, part relief, part disbelief. The courtroom scene replayed in her mind over and over, the judge's calm face, his words, his warmth. It wasn't just about winning a case, it was about being seen. All her life, people had told her to stay quiet, to not make trouble, to fit in. But that day, someone powerful told her the opposite. Someone told her that her voice mattered. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Months later, a small letter arrived at the Providence Municipal Court. It was from Aaliyah. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Dear Judge Caprio. Thank you for believing me when no one else did. I've joined a debate club at school, and I'm learning how to use my words instead of my anger. I think you'd be proud. One day, I'll come back as a lawyer, just like you said. Sincerely, Aaliyah Thompson." Judge Caprio read it twice. Then, quietly, he folded it and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He didn't show it to anyone. But that letter stayed with him for a long, long time. In every courtroom, there are hundreds of cases. Names, numbers, fines, violations, most of them forgotten within hours. But every once in a while, there's one that stays, not in the books, but in the heart. Aaliyah's story became one of those. Because this wasn't just a story about a teenage girl accused of disrespect. It was a story about how easy it is to break someone's spirit and how powerful it is to rebuild it with kindness. It was a story about a judge who didn't just apply the law, but remembered the humanity behind it. And it was a story about a young black girl who refused to be silent in the face of prejudice and found strength in being heard. In the years that followed, clips of that courtroom moment began circulating online. Millions of people watched. Some cried. Some smiled. Many said the same thing: the world needs more judges like Frank Caprio. But Caprio himself never watched it again. He didn't need to. Because he hadn't done it for the cameras. He had done it because that's who he was. Music swells gently, hopeful yet emotional. The narrator's voice fades softly. In the end, Aaliyah's story wasn't about guilt or innocence, it was about dignity. It reminded everyone who watched that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about compassion, understanding, and giving people a chance to rise. That day, Judge Frank Caprio didn't just dismiss a case. He restored faith in justice, in kindness, and in the simple, powerful truth that every person deserves to be seen for who they are, not what others assume them to be. And as the lights dimmed in the courtroom that evening, one could almost hear the echo of his words. Hold your head high, Aaliyah. Never let anyone make you feel small.